Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Cedar Lake Historical Association. I'm Julie Zazada. I'm the Executive Director here, and we're happy to have you at the museum at Lassen's Resort this afternoon. If you were here on May 3rd, you are well aware that we just celebrated our 103rd anniversary. Summer is officially in season at Lassen's, as far as we're concerned. Our event made the front page of the Post-Tribune thanks to Carrie Napoleon. So Luann Miller, our longtime volunteer, was awarded the 2024 Beatrice Horner Cultural Award. Chef Eric Hines was introduced as our new Lassen's Resort chef. And our beautiful kitchen enhancements, which were funded by a grant from the Crown Point Community Foundation, as well as designated gifts from Bethel Church and many of our Innovation Fund donors, those were revealed that day as well. So in case you missed it, never fear, it's all up on the YouTube channel, just like this presentation will be in another day or two. So please know that you can head over there to be able to see the recording. And today is the beginning of National Travel and Tourism Day. So we're recognizing this week, which was an initiative established by the U.S. Travel Association in 1983 to celebrate the U.S. travel community and travel's essential role in stimulating economic growth, cultivating vibrant communities, creating quality job opportunities, inspiring new business, and elevating the quality of life for Americans every day. We are pleased to welcome Barb Mack from the South Shore Convention and Visitors Authority. They have generously sponsored complimentary museum gallery admission today, and doing that to help us support tourism here in Cedar Lake. So Barb, you want to come up and just make a couple opening remarks?
Yay! Wasn't prepared for this. We have an interim CEO and she's out of town, so I'm default right here, right now. But welcome everyone. We are so happy to be working with Julie. She is someone that we really want to clone and have her in every one of our cities and towns because she is a wealth of knowledge and energy, and her vision of what she has or what's going to form here is unbelievable. So we enjoy working with you as well as Lassen's out here. And as Julie mentioned, it is the start. Today is the first day of National Travel and Tourism Week. So you see our booth out front here, and you'll see us one day each week around Northwest Indiana. We try to go to some different towns and cities, and then Wednesday is kind of a big event for us as well. We are sponsoring the game at the Railcats game on Wednesday night. So it's going to be 78 degrees that day, so if you're free, not doing anything, come on out to the ballpark, enjoy an inexpensive hot dog and beer, a lot less expensive than going into the city. We also, I want to mention a couple things. We have an exhibit going on right now at our exhibit hall at the Indiana Welcome Center in Hammond. It's the Calumet Heritage. It was originally at the Field Museum in Chicago, and it is going to be at our exhibit hall until October 6th. It's free. We're open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Sunday, 7 days a week. So come on up, and I think the biggest thing I think that Lassen's
We're excited to have
here as part of the exhibit was the ice truck.
Yeah.
So, and then as of just this past Friday, our new Indiana, the official travel magazine here for Northwest Indiana, South Shore, we just got them in, so there's a bunch of them out here on the table, so grab one on your way out. We have some rack cards that have some events in there as well as Indiana Festival guides. So very happy to sponsor this event today, and again, thank you for coming. And again,
Celebrate tourism.
Celebrate tourism. We go out, go see your attractions, go to the restaurants, go to the Railcats game, go to Albany's, go to places like Lassen's, and just enjoy yourself. We have a lot more to see and do than a lot of people realize here in Northwest Indiana.
Thank you, Barb.
Yep, appreciate it.
So as Barb mentioned, the ice truck is up in the exhibit hall all summer long. She's very excited to be up there, so go visit with her. And then our other items up there, some from Coffin Shady Beach, as well as the items that we're traveling around from Gary up at the Field Museum. Now they've made their way back here to the Calumet region, so very excited about that. Now our guest presentation today is sponsored by an action grant from Indiana Humanities with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So our theme for this particular grant, this action grant that we were awarded, is Culinary Anthropology. You're going to hear us say that a lot this season. Dr. Ezekiel Flannery is local here to the Calumet region. He lives in Miller, and today he's going to share with us the traditional food cultures of Northwest Indiana. Now we sought him out for his expertise in ethnobotany, which, hope I get this right, is the study of how people use locally available plants. So he'll explain more about who he is and his background and all of that, but in particular we asked him if he would discuss native vegetation and the diet of the Potawatomi who used to be here in our town. And then on June 9th, the second program in the Culinary Anthropology series is called A Taste of Potawatomi Heritage. So Chef Eric will partner once again with Dr. Flannery, and you're invited to experience a modern menu inspired by seasonal flavors from the Potawatomi culinary tradition. Your meal will feature strawberry and milkweed leaf salad with Juneberry vinaigrette and mapled candy walnuts, tempura dandelion fritters with plum and brie cheese sauce drizzle and fresh spotted bee balm leaves, pecan and hazelnut crusted walleye with quinoa, calico corn beans, zoodles, chipotle strawberry gastri, and sassafras ice cream with candied maple seed pods, Juneberry compote, and milkweed flowers. So, not common in our diet every day, and you're going to hear all about some of these ingredients today and have a chance to come out and taste them and really connect with history in a completely new way. We're so excited about this project, about this program. So registering is absolutely required for that program. We need to know how many people are coming. For members, we're pleased to be able to offer it for $5 a person. And if you're not a member, it'll be $10 a person. But I know you all want to become members today. So we've got the forms in the back of the room. Nancy will hook you up at the desk. We'd love to have you join us and support us year-round. The third component of Culinary Anthropology is going to be the development of a permanent exhibit that goes into the Story of Cedar Lake exhibit gallery, and that's going to highlight the Potawatomi people as well, with a focus on the moons of the Potawatomi calendar, the changes in the seasons, and the ways that the Potawatomi foraged and planted and hunted and harvested food around Cedar Lake in particular, but of course throughout the region. So we'll unveil that exhibit on July 24th. That's our STEAM Through History annual celebration, and we're going to do it on that day because we're also pairing it with another grant that we've received from Indiana Humanities that's going to have a focus on even more Indigenous culture, and we will be doing a land acknowledgement and have a little reception that afternoon. So save that date. I'll give you way more information in the coming days ahead, but just wanted to plant that seed in your head. And of course, you see the boats. The duty line operations are going to resume in less than 1 month. So up first on June 12th, Steamer Dewey hits magnificent Cedar Lake. So we'd love to have you come out for that. Tickets are on sale. And then Baby Dewey and her sunset dinner cruises will begin. Those are also going to start up in June. I believe that June 20th is the only ticket that's available for sale still in the month of June, but there's others in July through September for you to be able to purchase. So there's cards on the front desk. We're all here to answer your questions today, so if you have any questions about Baby Dewey and how the whole dinner cruise works, happy to answer those for you. And, wait for it, we are launching another culinary experience here at Lassen's Resort, Flavors of History. It's craft-made, small batch ice cream, handcrafted with the finest all-natural ingredients and no preservatives, prepared exclusively for the museum at Lassen's Resort by Chef Eric. So our inaugural flavor is available today. It is called Binion's Berry Pie, which folds fresh mixed berry compote into handcrafted vanilla ice cream and topped with a graham cracker crumble. So we have some cups available of that today for $3 serving. All ice cream flavors that we roll out this summer will, in our Flavors of History line, will have historic inspiration. So for example, Binion's Berry Pie was inspired by Binion's Resort, for those of you who are from the area. The Binion family moved to Cedar Lake about 1877, and John and his son Christopher purchased land to start a resort, hotel, and restaurant just around the bend here, just south of our hotel. It was famous for its wonderful home cooking. In addition to 25-cent chicken dinners, they had homemade berry pies, fruit and berry pies. So you can learn all about that if you go to our website of Resorts of Cedar Lake at cedarlakehistory.org. Check it out at the front desk. We can give you more information. But we just want you to know that here's another new experience that we are so excited to be able to unveil and to bring to you. So we also have lemonade and popcorn available today, so you can get a lemonade and, oh, this is not just any pause. pause, let me back up. Lassen's Sparkling Lemonade, our signature lemonade, which again, if you were there on May 3rd, you heard all about the process that Chef Eric has used to develop this specifically for us, as well as our Flapper Girl popcorn, which has a chocolate, just speak it out, Chef Eric.
White chocolate, lavender, and cooked in duck fat.
Yes, absolutely delicious. So you can get that. You just check out at the front desk. Nancy will give you tickets, and then you can go into the cafe and pick up all your treats after the presentation. So thank you all for coming out today. I am so happy to be able to introduce Dr. Ezekiel Flannery to you.
So a little bit about myself to start. I've lived in different parts of the Calumet region throughout my life. Started out in Hammond. I wasn't born in Hammond, but that was the first place I ended up was in Hammond and Hessville. After that, I moved to Griffith for about 6 years. Went to high school in Valparaiso in part. And then I left the Calumet region for a while, lived in Chicago, lived in Mexico, lived in other places. Came back and have been in Miller on and off for about 10 years now. So, and my research has been on the history of foods and focused on Native American food. I started out by working in Mexico with rural farmers. And I was in the countryside in Mexico in small villages talking to women that were growing corn, squash, and beans together. They were growing beautiful flowers in their garden. They were growing all these medicinal herbs, and they knew everything in their neighborhood. Every single plant they knew. And I thought, gosh, there's so much knowledge here. What happened to our knowledge back at home? Why don't we know all of these things, right? And then I started to talk to my grandmother, and she's from Sicily originally, and she told me some of the different things that they used to use. And I made it an effort to learn over these past 15 years what the food culture of Northwest Indiana was like when this was part of the Potawatomi territory and before. All right, so I have worked with a lot of different people. I have worked with a lot of different archives. I'm going to kind of go over that. And the focus has been on the 3-county area, just to let you know. Generally, I've been focused on Lake County, Porter County, and LaPorte County, with the primary focus on Lake and Porter. So, yeah, let me just, does anybody know where this is? Kankakee Lake, I think. No, not the Kankakee, the Little Calumet River. The Little Calumet River. And all of what we're going to talk about, all of Northwest Indiana, in the 1800s, by the 1800s, all of Northwest Indiana was being cultivated or used, carefully stewarded, is how I put it, and how the Native Americans that I talked to have put it. All of Northwest Indiana was being carefully stewarded. It didn't look like European agriculture. It didn't look like the way that people in Europe produced food, but it was all being used. All of the land was being used. And I'm going to kind of walk you through how different areas were being used in Northwest Indiana. So this was the wetlands. Some of the richest medicinal plant grounds in the United States are still along the Little Calumet River to this day. The Calumet region is, in fact, one of the most biodiverse areas in the world, although it has been compromised by the industry over the past 200 years. I mean, Northwest Indiana is so unique. I mean, we have the dunes, we have White, we have so many different places. We have Wolf Lake, we have Cedar Lake, places that have completely different feels. Hobart, the identity, the feel, the land, the vegetation. The vegetation changes. In the case of where I live, in Miller, next to Marquette Park, we have 8 ecosystems within a half a mile of Lake Michigan. And if you look at the soil map, it just changes so quickly. It's amazing. I get excited about it. So the first thing what I'd like to begin with is a little quote that kind of sets the stage for Northwest Indiana. Although it's undoubtedly still the richest region in Indiana and in the Great Lakes Basin in terms of biodiversity, Northwest Indiana ecosystems are fragmented and under constant diverse stress from multiple sources. That's pretty vague. We know what those stresses are, I think. But I like to spell them out a lot of times. Without restoration of ecosystems, functions, and structures, their long-term viability is severely threatened. And Lake and Porter County, so this is the EPA's assessment on Northwest Indiana. So if we have one of the most densely biodiverse areas in the eastern United States or in the Great Lakes Basin, we also have the plants represent that. The flavors also would reflect that biodiversity. And if you look at our local cuisine today, we don't have that richness that was here for thousands of years in terms of our use of our thousands of local plants. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about those so you have a good structure for what was here before. So if you are thinking about restoring or making changes to your own garden or even using new plants for new flavors, hopefully you'll have some very concrete ideas today. And Lake and Porter counties together, form one of the most densely biodiverse regions in the country. In fact, the little pocket along Lake Michigan is more biodiverse than any place in the eastern United States in terms of plants. And that is because of Native American presence for 10,000 or more years. They planted and replanted and stewarded and cared for that area. As I've heard from elders, it has always been a sacred ceremonial ground. And so that's something that when I found that out, I was very moved and it made a big impact. And I think that was about 12 years ago when I was up in Michigan working with some elders there. So I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But what I want to do is give you a little map. Maybe some of you have seen these beautiful maps before. They kind of highlight the biodiversity, the different ecosystems and vegetation. They're very general, right? So it's much more micro in Northwest Indiana. As we've talked about already, you can literally take 10 or 12 steps and see the soil change. In Miller, it changes in 100 feet. You can have 3 different soil types. So here you have what they call preset. The person that drew this map hadn't received a very full picture of history, and they called it a pre-settlement vegetation, as if this area were not settled for thousands of years, which is confusing for me, who's worked with Miami and Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Odawa, Ho-Chunk, Sakpa, all different tribes. This was a very settled area, so the idea that it was pre-settlement is just a little bit inaccurate. And here I have when Euro-Americans arrived, every inch of Northwest Indiana was being carefully stewarded. As I've gone through the years, I started with just the area close to the Indiana Dunes, and I worked my way down to the Kankakee, right? And so I was looking for areas that were not being used by the Potawatomi, were not being used by the Miami, and I couldn't find any. And then I started to place together, based on my research in Mexico, I started to kind of see a picture, and I'm going to present that to you, of how the tribes here worked with foods. Now remember, this area has been in touch with Mexico for thousands of years. So what we also don't learn, also missing from a lot of our history texts and history classes, is a complete picture of the intercontinental trade routes that were here before Europeans came. And so you have, there are waterways and there are landways. Most of our highways today, 94, 36, 12, 20, Ridge Road, well that is 6. These were all Indian trails or highways before, right? So yeah, so they were already being used. Wow. And then the trade with Mexico often took place in the summertime as tribes moved up and down the Mississippi River and used this area as a portage area. And you'll get to see a little bit more about how the Calumet, the Grand Calumet and the Calumet River function as a protected area for tribes to do, to work with other tribes and to trade seeds and to trade knowledge about plants and medicines. So this is kind of how the maps, our area was always connected to the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Arctic, and beyond. All right, so I think that's something that I would have enjoyed learning as a child. It would have made me feel so proud and connected to Northwest Indiana, and a lot of you reference the energy that you feel at the lake here. If you've been to Wolf Lake, there's a similar sacred energy or powerful energy, however you'd like to put it, a unique energy. The Indiana Dunes, Hobart, Deep River, the Deep River area is amazing. All these areas were being used for a long, long time. So my research into food these are kind of the sources, and I always think as an academic, I'm kind of a sucker for going back to sources and making sure that people know where I'm getting my information from. And if they want to do their own research, which a lot of people who come to my presentations or see my talks, they do want to do their own research. They want to say, well, what exactly was going on in Illinois, across the border, etc. So I looked at local land surveys, early maps, written historical accounts, old settlers' meeting notes, and those are European settlers, right? When they say old settlers, I should have probably indicated that it wasn't the old Miami settlers' meeting notes, because those weren't written down. And they were in another language. Oral interviews and conversations with natives and non-natives, participations in many workshops. So there are several organizations that work to revive the foodways in the Great Lakes area. And I participated with Potawatomi, Miami, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, different tribes in this area. In Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana. I've taken and continue to study Potawatomi language and culture. Potawatomi is a full-fledged language, very complex language. If any of you have studied Potawatomi or Miami, you know that the verbs are incredibly complex. The tenses, you have to be aware of what you're speaking. All the land is considered a living being, so you have special verbs for living beings and non-living beings. So you talk about the water as if it's a living being, you have to use a whole different set of grammatical endings. It's very complex. Written research with tribal elders, and then working with indigenous communities in Mexico and Peru. So that's kind of how I brought together all of this that I'm sharing with you today. And it's the culmination of about 15, I was thinking about counting the years in my head, I think it's about 17 years now of research. So let's focus on the Potawatomi so you have something to take home, concrete things. So food is a central part of Potawatomi culture. How many of you have met Potawatomi individuals or Miami individuals? Anybody been over to? You have? Good. So the months of the year, the moons of the year represent the actual community activities that are being done. So we're going to see, you have, I think I put them up here. You have maple syrup gathering moon, you have wild rice making moon, you have berry collecting moon, you have what we're in right now. Any idea what month we're in right now? Strawberry moon, right? Strawberry moon. So it follows kind of the seasons. Traditional foods come from plants, trees, birds, animals, fungi, insects as well, right? And then the food production depends on the ecosystems, right? So in Northwest Indiana, we have wet prairie, we have dry prairie, we have forest, we have woodlands, we have savanna, we have dune, we have interdunal ponds, we have more sub-ecosystems than you can imagine. And people sometimes drive through Northwest Indiana and don't realize that there's anything more than factories and maybe Gary or fields. So the food production can be perennial, annual, or biennial plants. We're going to talk about that in a second. The food is prepared and stored naturally, right? Traditionally, dried, smoked, seasoned, grilled, and the containers are also made from local materials. And the food is local, organic, and seasonal, right? All these catchwords for today that people act like it's something new. The Potawatomi, the Miami have been doing for thousands of years, right? So the food is local, organic, seasonal, but options are constantly enriched. So it's not as if the Miami and the Potawatomi weren't revising their diet every year. They were learning from other cultures, they were in contact with other cultures, and they weren't just stuck in time. Because I think there's some people who kind of assume that Native Americans were stuck in time or something. So one of the well, these are the months of the year that we're going to work with in a minute. But these are just the Potawatomi, so you can get you an idea of how complex the Potawatomi language is. Podewadmimwan is the language. And then these months, because the Potawatomi live, and still today live, from here all the way up into Canada. And so the language will change, and so will the months of the year, because the months that you make maple syrup will be different depending on your climate. So if you're up in Canada, it's going to be later. right? But Zizbakto ke gizis, Ketegan ke gizis, Demin gizis, Min ke gizis, No Mino ke gizis. Right? So these are all food-related months of the year. No Roman gods or Latin, I don't know what our months are named after, I think Roman gods or something. So, yeah, and so to Northwest Indiana, so what I wanted to look at was how Potawatomi and Miami used the wetlands to grow food and produce food, how they used the drylands, how they used the woods, etc. So one of the major ways, or one of the major places in Northwest Indiana were the wild rice complexes. As most of you know of the history, there are many wetlands in Northwest Indiana. Most of them were being used for wild rice production. We were as far as I know, my historic research, Northwest Indiana was the leading producer of wild rice for many, many years. We were also one of the leading producers of maple syrup for many years until our trees were cut down. So, so wild rice was a basis, and it's still a basis, the basis of Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa cuisine. It's the first food, solid food, that a young child will eat, and it's the last food that an elder will eat traditionally before they choose to pass on to the next world. So, wild rice complexes were all around Northwest Indiana. Something that I didn't know anything about. And I'm going to bring some wild rice to the next event that we have. So you can see we're going to actually prepare some. And we'll prepare wild rice that's been grown traditionally and hand harvested and parched, all of that good stuff. Yeah. And so these wild rice complexes were created to maximize biodiversity. So they also grew cattails, lotus, cranberries, different mosses that would attract insects, that would attract different fish, etc. So they were really quite advanced, quite sophisticated. Now our waterways are pretty unproductive. So we have to think about, how maybe our future can be more what our past was. So sophisticated milpas. So milpas is the term that they use in Mexico for traditional agriculture, where you have corn, squash, and beans growing together. So you have corn, squash, beans, and other plants growing together. They maximize the use of nutrients. So instead of planting rows, and this is something when Europeans came into Northwest Indiana, they didn't recognize the food production sophistication because they weren't in rows. Right? They weren't in rows, they weren't planted separately, the plants were all growing together, so because they didn't know what to make of it, and they just said that they weren't, that it was wild. That was their conclusion. So they were growing 50 plus other vegetables, flowers, herbs, greens, sunchokes, milkweed, wild quinoa, lamb's quarters, all of that. And the second point is really important. There's no word for weeds in Potawatomi or in Miami. That simply means that you don't know what the plant is for. Weed is a funny term. Oh, I don't want that here. If you look at where the plants that people spend the most amount of money to remove, they are the highest, the most medicinal plants known to man. And they spend billions of dollars to destroy them. So it's a shame. And it's kind of a waste of money at the end of the day. So the Potawatomi and the Miami are known to be exceptionally talented gardeners. The Potawatomi and Miami homelands spanned, so they had wild rice production area, but they also had corn production. So they were some of the few tribes that had access to these two basic grains. So they had rice and corn all in one area. So that made them particularly sophisticated in terms of their production. And then this is just like a little overview of some of the words that I would use to describe current methods of Native American gardening by the Miami, the Potawatomi, and other tribes. It's organic, it's sustainable, it's biodynamic, it's permacultural, it's intercropping. It's all these buzzwords that are being sold to us these days as something new. This 10,000 years old, right, or more potentially. In our area, controlled burns were exceptionally important. There were controlled burns to make sure that the plants grew well, that the seeds germinated, that the berries produce ripe, plump berries. It's really sophisticated. There are over 30 uses of controlled burns that the Potawatomi in this area, in the Miamis, they still have this knowledge. And what's amazing is they're still willing to share it with outsiders after all that's been lost. You know, I think that that's something to really think about. That generosity of spirit is tremendous. So, going to the ice cream, bringing us to what I did this year was, well, I started making gelato at home. I think that a lot of the basic flavors of Northwest Indiana are so far removed from our diet right now that I thought bringing ice cream flavors or gelato flavors would be a way to bring those flavors back home, back where they belong, and they also have medicinal uses. So I think it's really important to start teaching our youngsters, our children. I just did a presentation, actually a workshop, a day-long workshop for a school in Chicago. They brought down 90 kids, and we took them around the dunes and kind of introduced them to this, the medicinal and the flavor profiles. So we would have winter, we would have white cedar, then we would go on to maple, wild violets, wild strawberries, blueberries, elders, plums, sumac, pawpaw, black walnut, and white pine. And what's interesting is the medicinal properties of each of these, when they're at their peak, will prepare our bodies to be healthy in the next month or the next moon cycle. So it's nature, it's using the intelligence of nature, which is what native cultures are exceptionally good at, to prepare for the next season, right? So that you can maintain health. So you would have high vitamin C, you would have nutrients that are coming up with the maples. You have, for example, with the sassafras, I don't think I have a picture of the sassafras. How many of you have tried sassafras? Great, all right, so you know that flavor. And did any of you know what the health benefits of sassafras are?
Yeah, I can tell you.
Can you tell me?
The sassafras tea is we use it to kill all well, I'll think of the word in a minute. Negative things on our bodies.
So in the spring, what I've heard it explained to me in Michigan was that after when the winter we're really stuck at home a lot, we don't move around as much, and so our blood gets kind of thick and we need it to thin out and move around. And so the sassafras stimulates all of the internal organs and gets them kind of moving again. So yeah, just traditional remedies that are, interestingly enough, all these traditional remedies that were written off for so long, now the scientists are coming, oh wait, there's science to back this up, oh wait, and the native people always knew that their medicines worked, right? But now we have to convince people that with science, you know, we have to measure it over time in a laboratory and stuff, but people knew that these all work. So these are all medicines, these are all delicious flavors that you can find locally and abundantly in Northwest Indiana. And yeah, I think just to conclude some of the specifics, and then I'm going to ask you guys to ask some questions. Again, to review, seasonal, local, and organic. There are 13 moons. Every moon has a plant or series of plants that are associated with it. And the moons are the months of the year. So 13 moons, I think 28 days, right, to get a solar year. Examples of some of the most commonly widely used seasonal plants, we already saw those, but the white pine in the winter time. I struggled to think, my goodness, what would people eat in the winter time? What would people eat in the winter time here? But there's a lot that you can eat, actually. There's a lot that's right under the ground. And the white pine, the northern white cedar, the spruce, etc. You can eat those all winter long. So those are some of the things. And let's see if I have one more slide before. Yeah, so I guess Julie mentioned something about a land acknowledgement, and I kind of want to think about, you know, is that enough? I have, you know, a lot of Native friends, and so I think it's really interesting for us to think about this, and if you have any comments or questions about this right now, I'd be willing to to address them, but what does it mean to live on another culture's land? And especially a culture that cared for their water, that cared for their air, that cared for their soil, that left Northwest Indiana in a beautiful, sophisticated, cultivated condition. And we've kind of made a mess of it. I mean, that's how that's my language for myself. You know, that's how I feel. We kind of made a mess. How do I show respect? And in my case, I started to learn the language, right? I said, you know, I need to know more about how this works. And going back to where I started in Mexico, I was watching these women in rural Mexico. They knew all the plants that surrounded them. They knew how to use this. They didn't need to go to the doctor. If they cut themselves, they knew which plant to put on there. They knew how to reduce a stomach ache. They knew how to reduce, and their water was clean. You know, how do you start learning? I started learning in Mexico, but there's a lot of places that you can start learning here. The language is available now. The language was illegal. So that's another thing that you might not have known, is that there was freedom of religion and freedom of speech only for European Americans. That wasn't the case for Native Americans. So until 1994, you had to speak your language underground. And even when they made it legal, people weren't like jumping up to speak their language. They're like, I remember we used to get arrested, or in many cases, people got shot for speaking their language. So, and that doesn't even mention the boarding school era, where children from Native families, including in my area where my grandparents are from in upstate New York, they were removed from their families and put into boarding schools. So these are things that kind of collectively, they're related to what happened, and they're part of our history that we don't like. I don't want to talk about this, but what I want to talk about is that amazing Northwest Indiana that's still in front of us, that has this history and sophistication, and still has an energy that many of you talked about. You know, we're in a special place, and our food culture should reflect that, and they can reflect that again if each one of us makes just small changes, I think. And then, I just talked about that, the final bullet point, what do I do about the incredible loss and violence? You know, talk to people, think about what I can do, use the plants, make amends, you know, do the best that I can. And then I just wrote down a couple projects that I do to revive the foodways in Northwest Indiana. I just work in my neighborhood in Miller. We have hundreds of plants, and so I started to just talk to my neighbors about ones that had beautiful flowers. People love that. When you start with the ones that have gorgeous flowers, unique flowers that are like, and you find out that they're medicinal and they're flavorful and they can be used as a vegetable, you get so excited. And now my neighbors, you know, where I had 2 on board at the beginning, now I have 10 neighbors that are planting pecan trees, planting pawpaw trees, planting persimmons, planting wild plums. They come to me and ask for extra plants. So I work with my neighborhood there, and we share knowledge about our medicines, and that's something that hasn't been done in a while in Northwest Indiana. Surveying already existing plants, right. One of the things that you do is when you get to a new place, you look at what you already have instead of just plowing it up. And then the third one, sharing food and medicine, that's what I talked about, maximizing biodiversity. That's my goal in my yard and in general, is to maximize the biodiversity, to take advantage of Northwest Indiana's natural tendency to be biodiverse and the indigenous cultural history and knowledge, and bring that together to create a better future for all of us. So I'm going to stop there and hopefully get some questions from you all.